So a couple of weeks ago, some friends of mine and I recorded a podcast about Jordan Peterson. It's on my channel here on YouTube. And then a few days ago, David Fuller, who runs the channel called Rebel Wisdom here on YouTube, approached us and asked if we'd like to have a conversation with him. And we're going to do that in a few days here. And I've been watching some of Rebel Wisdom's material about Jordan Peterson, and I wanted to reflect on it a bit. I enjoy YouTube for the same reason that I enjoy recording YouTube videos like this, for the same reason that I enjoy conversation with people interested in ideas, and that is because it allows me to understand myself better and deepen my own capacity for perceiving and thinking about what's going on and what the hell is going on. So much of this cultural transformation that we're in the midst of is a function of the breakdown of our old ways of categorizing reality. And Jordan Greenhall talks about sense making and the way that these old forms of sense making no longer function in an adequate way, and that we're basically facing, in Greenhall's terms, an extinction level crisis where, unless we're able to adapt to the new circumstances, which media technologies are transforming consciousness, there's an evolution of consciousness underway, and consciousness has always been in a co-evolutionary relationship with the media technologies through which it senses itself. Consciousness isn't just some disembodied floating vapor, right? Or some kind of pure spirit. It's embodied and extended and augmented by technology, by physical environments. And so, go back, if you look at human evolution, it's all about the evolution of communication media, mediums of communication technologies, right? Whether we're talking about speech or drumming or script, the first forms of writing, and then the printing press and the alphabetic language, radio, television, the internet. These mediums give consciousness a new platform upon which to express itself, and which is the cause and which is the effect, right? Is it the media technologies that are causing new forms of consciousness, or is it new forms of consciousness that are giving rise to these new media, forms of media? It's both at once. It's the kind of a profound mystery in terms of which is the cause and which is the effect. And what that mystery suggests to me is that we have to think of this in a nonlinear, recursive sort of way. But here we are on YouTube, and the intellectual dark web is doing its thing, and the old legacy media, mass media, broadcast media are withering and really unable to hold the attention of people and shape the consciousness of people in the way that they had for so many decades. And now, in thinking about what's happening, a lot of people will think of it in terms of, the postmodern condition and relativism and the post-truth or post-fact era. And what I don't think is happening is that what the intellectual dark web folks are doing, what I don't think they're doing, is returning us to this place where truth is once again something objective and independent of us as subjects, as perceivers. That's an old kind of modernist idea. And it's true that, so modernism, the modern world, I think, as a philosopher, I would argue it began with Descartes, which is the centering of the subject. And after Descartes, Immanuel Kant further radicalized this centering of the subject by saying that we only have access to the to our own subjective ordering of the world, and that our organism grants us a certain perceptual field, right, of space and time, and that's a function of our own organism, our own organization, our own cognitive organization, right? And that the categories we use to think about the world, they come kind of pre-installed in us, they're innate. And so the world that we perceive, the world that we can think about, the world that we know, even the world that science knows, is merely phenomenal from Kant's perspective. And all of modern philosophy is rooted in this idea, a form of subjectivism. But for Kant, we can still have necessary and universal knowledge. We can still have truth, even though that truth is shaped by our own subjective capacities. Postmodernism is still a form of modernism, still centering the subject. It's just questioning the necessity and the universality of the subject's construction of experience, of a world, right? So whereas for Kant, we all had to share the same world because there was a certain necessary and universal structure to our understanding, to rationality. For postmodernism, that universality breaks down. The recognition of multiple cultural perspectives sort of explodes the idea that we could ever have some common or universal ground upon which to build scientific knowledge that would be true for all people in all places at all times. So contingency and particularity, perspectivism, these become ascendant in the postmodern era. But again, it's still a subject-centric orientation, and in that way it's inheriting modernism. So what I don't think is happening with the intellectual dark web is this attempt to return to a kind of objectivism, right? Which I don't know when that would have ever existed. That's not the modern perspective, right? There, you might say that the old Cartesian picture of a material world out there and a mental world in here, and we use logic and mathematics to map the external world as objectively as we possibly can. That view has been shown to be untenable because the mind is not separate from the body. I don't think the mind is merely, therefore, a material process. I'm a panpsychist. I don't want to get all into Alfred North Whitehead and what panpsychism really is, but it's an alternative to dualism and monism. It's a form of pluralism, I've argued, where what reality is finally made of is a nested, enveloped series of perspectives. Some perspectives are wider than others, but ultimately what reality is made of is perspectives. And not just human perspectives, right? Each of the cells in my body has a perspective on the world. Those perspectives overlap. So it's not like we're all in our own little solipsistic shells. Our worlds overlap. Our perspectives are, to some degree or another, shared. But not all perspectives are shared, and the evolution of the universe is the process whereby some novel perspectives emerge which overtake the formerly more pervasive perspectives, and things are in this constant state of contention. There's plenty of relationality and cooperation there, but there's also competition, and so this is a kind of Nietzschean perspective that Nietzsche articulated in his late work on The Will to Power. I would want to amend Nietzsche's perspective a little bit, and I do this with Whitehead's help. So for me, what we're moving into is not a return to objectivism, but a recognition of the participatory nature of reality. And Jordan Peterson is pretty good about this. I think he's still a little too anthropocentric about it, where it's human speech that creates meaning and creates the only reality that human beings are capable of knowing. But rather, from my perspective as a panpsychist, um, human beings are one example of an agent in the world with a perspective, with the capacity for expression, and we are trying to express ourselves, trying to shape the ongoing unfoldment of the universe in the context of many other forms of agency and intelligence, many other forms of consciousness, many other forms of inner experience. From my perspective, there is some modicum of experience in a single atom, in an electron, in a photon. Stars have interiority. Galaxies are possessed of mind. I don't like to say that galaxies possess a mind. I don't even like to say that human beings possess a mind, because that makes it sound like there's a dualism there, like there's something possessing a mind. A mind is a possession state, if you will. And mind, in that sense, haunts the universe from the lowest scale to the grandest scale. And, God is the soul of the world. And that soul, that world soul, is recapitulated in a holographic way in all things, right? So you might say that I'm a panentheist. It's a form of theism, but it's not one where God is separate from the universe. But unlike pantheism, it's not just that the whole universe is just identical to God, as some sort of monistic substance. It's more of a dynamic perspective that, yes, God is all things, but God is also in all things. And that creates this pluralistic tension. That creates this sense of incompleteness, not only in the universe, that it's an ongoing process, but a sense of incompleteness in the divine. God doesn't know what's going to happen next, right? This is referred to as, it's part of a process theology that I've tried to articulate. So the participatory nature of reality is such that, as Thomas Berry famously put it, reality is not composed of objects. Reality is not a collection of objects. Reality is a communion of subjects. It's a communion when things are going well. Sometimes there's conflict between subjects. But ultimately, we live in a universe that seems to tend toward order. Communication is possible, right? We're able to establish common worlds. We're able to share perspectives and arrive at understanding. It doesn't have to happen. Kant was wrong that there's one monolithic reason that declares or decrees necessary and universal truths that all people must agree on. Truth is an event. It occurs when we're doing our best to inhabit a common world. That common world is not the default, right? The commonality of the world, or the oneness of the world, is something we need to achieve. It's not something we're given in advance of the difficult work of, hashing out where I stand and where you stand. And we need to accomplish unity. We need to achieve it. It's not something that pre-exists our efforts, and it's not something that once achieved will just continue to persist without our continual maintenance, right? And maintaining this notion of a unified world, of a true universe, is a political task, a cosmopolitical task, you might say, and it's also a scientific task, and it's a religious task, and it's an aesthetic task. right? So on all these different levels, we're charged as human beings with trying to establish um, a sense of unity that will never be final. And we should never expect to arrive at a completed whole. There's always going to be tension, because without that tension, if there was completion, creativity goes out the window. Evolution ceases, and we enter a sort of a state of rigor mortis, and nothing new can happen. We don't want that, right? But nor do we want total chaos, nor do we want a war of all against all. And we're in a place right now, collectively, as a species, that is challenging us to arrive at a new form of sense-making, right, as Greenhall would say, that allows us to integrate what's valid about, to speak in political terms, what's valid about the conservative perspective and what's valid about the progressive perspective. And we need to get beyond both of those as separate perspectives and recognize that, yes, individual rights are important, but so are social responsibilities. Freedom, individual freedom, and social justice, right? And it's weird how, conservatives will talk about responsibility, and who responsibility to society, to a certain social order, right? And progressives will talk about rights, the rights of individuals, the rights of oppressed individuals who have been categorized into certain groups and who have historically, because of their being categorized as that group, have been oppressed and marginalized. And yet these values mix too, right? Because often we'll speak about social justice as a progressive thing, as a leftist thing, whereas individual freedom will be a conservative or a right-wing thing. And yet there's a sense in which at the same time, liberals, progressives are always talking about rights. We need rights for marginalized people, while the right will talk about responsibility. And so we're already, I think, recognizing the overlap here. And I'm excited to talk to David Fuller and the Rebel Wisdom folks, because David's looking for synthesis here, integration, and I'm all about integral consciousness. So yeah, stay tuned. That conversation will be shared soon.